good evening, good vach, shavua tov, and a good yor. That's Yiddish, or we also say a good gebenched yor. We've come out of the entire holiday season because we had a 3-day Hag at the end of Sukkot, going from Shmini Atzeret to Simchas Torah right into Shabbos. It was a little bit extra joyful, rejoicing, celebration. I hope everybody has come out inspired, uplifted, with a plan in place to keep that fragile new you, the things that you realize you need to do in your life, the atonement that you made, the energy that you gathered through that whole spiritual accounting in the last month of the year, Elul, leading right into Rosh Hashanah, the 10 days of awe, Yom Kippur, building our sukkah, living in that fragile space for a week, going into the VIP after party, Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day of Sukkot. It's when God says, okay, all the nations came, the bulls, the sacrifices were made on behalf of all the nations of the world in the Holy Temple. And then there's just one extra day of rejoicing, that Shmini Atzeret, between God and God's beloved. And then in Israel, Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah is the same day, but outside of Israel, it's a second day. Simchas Torah, a separate day. In our shul, it was beyond. I don't know about your shul. I hope it was like this. Somehow we broke through to some kind of other level of closeness to God, closeness to each other, rejoicing. And it was like I said to my Rav and to my friends, it's like we broke through. There's a concept of a klipa. A klipa is like a husk. There's this very Kabbalistic idea that the world is filled with holy sparks, and those sparks are trapped within husks of the mundane and the dour and, even, God forbid, evil. But when you break through, when you shatter these husks and you release the holy sparks, it's like you go to a new level and then you stay at that level. So it's like we reached a level of holiness in our community that it just is a higher level. And one of our rabbis, Rabbi Meni Chazanov, said that, the holiness that you achieve in these moments when you want to bring yourself to God, an offer of yourself, and say, I want to be better, I want to do better, I want to come closer to you, God. So that's a holiness that you attain in those moments. It stays with you forever, and you bring it back into the regular world. So now we're in this regular world, but still enthused and filled and energized by that holiness. Let's light up the darkness. Let's do some beautiful learning. I'm so excited. We're going to do a double daf tonight, but they're both relatively short. It'll end up being a kind of average length class, but beautiful, beautiful material tonight. Such a great way to come back to our class and learning together. So let's welcome Joe in the Inland Empire, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in mid-Missouri, Lorraine in Texas, Bella. Sharon came out of all this very tired. Yes, and stuffed. The diet starts tomorrow. Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Nancy in North Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, Marjorie in Georgia, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Covering 2 pages, God willing, pages 121 and 122 here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our journey through chapter 8 and discussion of Mishnah number 3, which I'm pretty sure we're going to, with God's help, complete tonight. Okay. So the Gemara, we picked this up near the bottom of page 121a, right? That's how we can do a double. We got a nice head start. The Gemara discusses a Mishnah that addresses the issue of intertribal marriages. Right? We've been talking about the daughters of Slofchad, who clarified with their question to Moses, who then clarified by asking God, what about a man who leaves daughters but doesn't have sons? Do the daughters inherit the way sons would? Yes, they do. But the special laws and circumstances of inheritance surrounding the children of Israel as they entered the promised land, which after the wars of conquest led by Joshua, there would be a distribution of the land among the tribes and among the families. There was this whole debate that we had among the sages. Is it according to the census when they came out of Egypt, or the census just before entering the promised land nearly 40 years later? And how was this distribution going to be done? And then this idea that there would be a law just for that generation, the ones coming out of the wilderness, the ones who settle the land. I mean, it took a few years to settle the land, but at any rate, that just sort of a temporary law, a temporary decree for that generation, that the women should marry within their tribe. As we saw, the daughters of Zelophehad certainly did marry within their tribe, so that those portions of land would be kept within their tribe, which I think was Menashe. And then the question was, were they commanded to do that, or were they advised to do that? So that's our context. Okay, so we learned in a Mishna there, Tractate Tainus 26b, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of the Hebrew month of Av, Tu B'Av, and as Yom Kippur, right? Beautiful timing. We're coming to this every year when we talk about Tu B'Av. This is the home address in the Talmud for the discussion of Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. Right, so Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said there were no days as joyous for the Jewish people as the 15th of Av and as Yom Kippur, as on these days the daughters of Jerusalem would emerge in white garments, which each woman borrowed from another. Why did they borrow garments? They did this so as not to embarrass one who did not have her own white garments. Rich and poor, you did not know who was rich, who was poor. Just all the women were dressed in white, and sometimes this is likened to a Jewish Valentine's Day. So the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. So granted that Yom Kippur is a day of joy. Wait. Isn't Yom Kippur a day of afflicting ourselves, fasting all day, beating our chests as we atone for our sins? Why is that a day of joy? Because it is a day of pardon and forgiveness. I think I said this here in our class right before Yom Kippur. And moreover, it is the day on which the last tablets of the covenant were given, meaning the second set of the Ten Commandments. The first were smashed after the incident of the golden calf, but the second tablets, which Moses carved and God inscribed, a partnership between God and man, those survive. But what is the special joy of Tu B'Av, of the 15th of Av? Rav Yehuda says, and why do we call it Tu B'Av? Right? Because the number 15, we might have thought is Yud, which is 10, and Hey, which is 5. But because that actually forms one of the names of God, instead we make it Tes Vav, 9 and 6 is how we spell 15. And so if you actually said that as a word, it would be Tu B'Av. So Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says this was the day when the members of different tribes were permitted to marry into one another's tribe, right? The end of that law just for that initial generation. Such marriages were restricted for the first generation to enter the land of Israel, as discussed on the page that we did prior to this past holiday, 120. What verse did the sages of that time interpret in support of their conclusion that this law was no longer in effect? The verse states, Numbers 36:6, this is the matter, Zois HaDevar, right? Zeh HaDevar, this is the matter, meaning this matter shall be practiced only in this generation, in which Eretz Yisrael is being divided among the tribes. Rabba Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan offered another explanation. The 15th of Av was the day when the tribe of Benjamin Benjamin, was permitted to enter into the congregation of the other tribes of Israel through marriage after the other tribes found a way to dissolve the vow that had prohibited them from marrying a member of the tribe of Benjamin. In the aftermath of the episode of the concubine in Gibeah, we learn that story in Judges chapters 19-20. Terrible episode in Jewish history, a civil war between Benjamin and the other tribes. Really just a whole ugly episode. But the rest of the tribe said that the tribe of Benjamin had behaved so badly that they made a vow that their children would not marry with the children of Benjamin. And that was a terrible situation, but that vow was nullified because they vowed that, we will not marry Benjamin, but we are not going to impose that vow or transmit that vow to our children. As it is written, and the men of Israel had taken an oath in Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife, meaning to the tribe of Benjamin as a wife. And the Gemara asks, what verse did the sages of that time interpret that enabled them to dissolve this vow? The verse states, none of us will give a daughter to Benjamin, and not none of our children. Therefore, the oath applied only to the generation that had taken the oath. Their children would not marry into Benjamin, but their grandchildren were permitted. So that's two possible meanings of why Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, is special. The end of the decree that women have to marry within their own tribe in the first generation. Much later in the episode of Benjamin, that now the tribes could intermarry. Now we're going to get a third possibility why Tu B'Av was special. The 15th of Av, according to Rav Dimi Bar Yosef, says that Rav Nachman says the 15th of Av was the day on which those designated to perish in the wilderness stopped dying, as the entire generation that had left Egypt had died due to the sin of the spies. As the Master says, as long as those designated to perish in the wilderness had not stopped dying, God did not speak with Moses. Now on page 121b. As it is stated, quote, this is Deuteronomy 2:16, so it came to pass when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people. And juxtaposed to that verse, the next verse, Deuteronomy 2:17, it is written that the Lord spoke to me, to Moses, saying, and Moses indicates only after the last of that generation had died was the speech of God directed to me. Meaning, when the Jewish people realized that the decree had been lifted, the day was established as a permanent day of rejoicing. Now, Tu B'Av, right? The antenna goes up a little bit. What else happens in Av? Tisha B'Av, right? Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. That's the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. And then on the 15th, 6 days later, one of the happiest days, if not the happiest day, one of the happy days, right? So what happened? So the idea was Tisha B'Av was the episode of the spies. That was the first of the tragedies and calamities that started on the 9th of Av. Later in history, both temples would be destroyed on that day. A whole bunch of other terrible things. But the first one was that the spies brought back that terrible report. Yeah, the Promised Land, amazing, but occupied by giants. We won't be able to defeat them. Everyone despairs. A ridiculous kind of despair, given that God is taking care of them with constant miracles and wonders in the desert. And that's when God says, yeah, this generation, not fit to enter the Promised Land. You still have a slave mentality. You're all going to die in the desert. Your children will occupy the Promised Land. Who was the exception to that? At the very least, Joshua and Caleb, right? Joshua and Caleb, Yehoshua and Caleb. They survived that. They merited to enter the land and they received extra portions, as we have learned. Did other people somehow evade that decree? I mean, certainly the people who were under 20 years old when they came out of Egypt, they were not included in this decree. And as we'll see here, there might be another group that also evaded that decree of death in the wilderness. But at any rate, that generation, they finished dying out. That, on Tu B'Av. Why on Tu B'Av? Because every year, one teaching is that every year on Tisha B'Av, that generation, on the anniversary of that calamity, everyone who was, subject to that decree, the people older than 20 years of age, at the time that the sin of the spies, they would lie down in a grave. Right? They would dig a hole in the ground and lie in it. And like 15,000 of them would not wake up the next morning. And this was the year in which everyone who, lay down in their holes, everybody woke up. Right? So there was no more dying on that date. Others say, well, the last of the generation was gone, and then they sat Shiva for them, and then it was over on the 16th, on the 15th. So let's see what's going on. Let's see what the Gemara actually says. That was just a little bit of background. And this idea, by the way, that all those years in the wilderness, because people were dying, they were all subject to this death sentence, there was a lack of joy in the encampment, right? Instead of, nice 2-year journey to learn what we need to learn, go into the promised land, now we've had to spend an extra 38 years. That's going to create a little bit of a lack of joy in the encampment. And when the nation's joy was diminished, Moses was not receiving prophecy. Now, did God not speak to him at all? Not in the way that God had talked about, that, alone among all the prophets of all time, he spoke with Moses face to face, not in a vision, not through some kind of a filter, as it were, but that Moses saw or perceived more of the presence and the glory of God than any other prophet ever. But that kind of prophecy was subdued and limited during these years. But after this Tu B'Av, the final one, when the death sentence was over, right? It was finished. Whoever was going to die in the wilderness had died. So they could celebrate that was over. And at that point, the nation's joy came up, and Moses was able to receive that kind of prophecy again. And it should be noted that this idea that the gate of tears is always open, right? When people cry out to God, the gate of tears is always open. He hears our prayers. But prophecy only comes on people in a state of joy. We've learned that elsewhere. And so this idea that there's some kinds of closeness to God that are only achieved through tears, and there's other kinds of closeness to God that are only achieved through joy. Okay, the Gemara continues to cite explanations for the significance of the 15th of Av. Ula says the 15th of Av was the day when King Hoshea, the son of Elah, removed the guards that Jeroboam in English, the son of Nevat, placed on the road so that Israel would not ascend to Jerusalem, for the pilgrimage festival. And by doing so, King Hoshea renewed the access to Jerusalem for pilgrims. Here we're talking about who was the wisest, richest, most powerful, most in control and establishing peace over Israel, king in all of history? David's son, Solomon, right? Who, when he was given the choice, do you want wealth and power or wisdom? He chose wisdom. And because he chose wisdom, God gave him power and wealth as well. He merited to build the first temple. He had, Israel was at the highest level in all of its history, respected by all the nations, absolute peace, power, allegiances, alliances. Sadly, so many of those alliances Solomon was able to forge by marrying princesses from other kingdoms. And that's why he had so many wives. And because he had so many wives, maybe he didn't pay attention so much, to the individual wives and to being a dad. Because what Solomon was not able to do was to transmit the tradition, like his father transmitted to him, to his son Rehoboam, who was a disaster as the next king of Israel and Judea when it was united. And then this guy, Jeroboam, led an uprising revolt, and the kingdom split in two. Jerusalem and Judea maintained the seat of David, but a new throne was established for Israel, the northern kingdom. They set up their own place to bring sacrifices. All of this was absolutely against Torah, violates Torah. And to try to get that kingdom established, that king prohibited his subjects from going to Jerusalem to bring sacrifices for Passover, for Shavuos, for Sukkot. Terrible thing. And, his throne survived. He had a successor and another successor. There were a bunch of kings of the northern kingdom, but eventually it fell to Assyria, and those are the lost tribes of Israel. At any rate, King Hoshea was not some wonderful king who reversed all those decrees, but he did allow his subjects to cross the border, as it were, into Judea and to bring offerings in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. And when he issued that edict, it's understood to have been on Tu B'Av. Now, it doesn't say this explicitly, by the way, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, but the sages sort of inferred it from other things that it does say. Now, Rav Matana says the 15th of Av, now another interpretation of why the 15th of Av was so joyful. Rav Matana says the 15th of Av was the day when the slain victims of Beitar were afforded burial several years after they were killed, and the Roman Emperor Hadrian decreed that they were not to be buried. So this was the final massive, awful defeat at the hands of the Romans in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. We're talking about the year 135 of the Common Era, more or less. Disastrous uprising against Rome. This is what really led to the destruction of the Holy Land by the Romans. They only destroyed the temple and Jerusalem around 70 AD, but 65 years later in this Bar Kokhba rebellion, here they slaughtered a real genocide against the Jews. About 1 million Jews were killed. They salted the earth so that it would not be productive again. And after the last of those battles, there were so many Jewish dead on the battlefield, and the Romans did not allow the Jews to bury their dead. For 3 years, the corpses lay on that battlefield, and you would expect that they would just rot, but a miracle was performed by Hashem. The corpses did not rot. And finally, Hadrian died. The new emperor allowed the Jews to bury their dead. And so the sages instituted a new blessing, which they added to the Birkat Hamazon that we say after meals, saying that God is good and does good, is good that he allowed the corpses to, remain whole while they were unburied, and does good that they were finally allowed to be buried. As Rav Matana says, on the day that the slain of Beitar were afforded burial, the sages in Yavne instituted the blessing, blessed is he who is good and who does good. And the term who is good is to give thanks that the corpses did not decompose despite the long delay. And the term who does good is to give thanks that the slain ones were ultimately afforded burial. Rabbah and Rav Yosef both say the 15th of Av, another explanation, is the day when they stopped cutting wood for the arrangement of wood on the altar in the Holy Temple. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer the Great says, once the 15th of Av came, the force of the sun would weaken, and from this day they would not cut additional wood for the arrangement, right? The altar in the Holy Temple, which had a fire burning for the offerings, needed a lot of wood. They would sort of cut and cure, dry out that wood. So it was like really good wood for burning on the altar, the best, highest quality wood. And it had to be properly cured. So it was all cut in the heat of the sun. And they stopped cutting it after the 15th of Av. They had enough wood for the coming year. And they didn't cut it after that so that it would be of the highest quality. Another interpretation, Rab Menashe said, and the people called the 15th of Av the day of the breaking of the sickle, the magal, as they did not need the lumbering, right, tools for chopping down trees until the following year. The Gemara adds, from this point forward, when the nights lengthen, one who adds demosif to his nightly Torah study will add Yosef to his life. And one who does not add, that person is Yesif. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the term Yesef? And Rav Yosef teaches it means that his mother will bury him as he will die during his mother's lifetime. In other words, in a society where they didn't have electricity, they were doing a lot less work in the winter when the nights were much longer and there was just daylight available for doing work. But by night, you can study Torah by candlelight. So if you have greater opportunity to study Torah and you don't use it, so you've missed a real opportunity. New subject. After discussing the generation of those who died in the wilderness, the Gemara mentions a tradition that relates to that generation. So the sages taught 7 people spanned in their lifetimes the whole world in its entirety, meaning their lives have spanned all of human history, right? 7 people whose lives overlapped each other were able to span all of human history. And guess what? It's still true, even though they said this 2,000 years ago. Sal, what the heck are you talking about? Methuselah, right, the longest lived person in the Bible, 969 years. Methuselah saw Adam in his lifetime. Shem saw Methuselah. Shem was a son of Noah. Jacob saw Shem. Right? Jacob, the son of Abraham and Isaac, right? The grandson of Abraham, the son of Isaac. Amram saw Jacob. So Amram was a descendant of Levi and the father of Moses. Ahijah, the Shilonite, saw Amram. Elijah saw Ahijah, the Shilonite, and Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, is still alive. Elijah never died. He ascended, and he's the one who travels between the heavenly realm and the earthly realm from time to time. The Gemara asks, and is it true that Ahijah the Shilonite saw Amram? But it is written, and no man among them remains save Caleb, the son of Yefuneh, and Yehoshua, Joshua, the son of Nun. Since Amram died, Moses' father, since Amram died well before the Jewish people left Egypt, in order to have lived at the time of Amram, Ahijah would have had to be an adult at the time of the Exodus. How then could he have lived through the generation of those who died in the wilderness? Someone who met Moses' father, how could he meet Elijah the prophet, who was way later, right after the promised land had been established? Who's this Ahijah who knew Moses' father and Eliyahu Hanavi? What? How could that be? Given that all the adults who came out of Egypt perished in the wilderness with the exception of Joshua and Caleb. How could this be? Rav Hamnuna says, the decree of death pronounced for the generation of the spies was not decreed upon the tribe of Levi. Oh. As it is written, quote, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all of those who were counted among you according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, right? The census that was taken in the wilderness, Numbers 14:29. The verse is right. Obviously, the earlier census, because these are the people who, because of them, they stayed in the desert for 38 more years, and the sin of the spies. So that census was from 20 years old and upward. Why would that not include Levi, the tribe of Levi? Because the decree after the sin of the spies applies to a person whose count is in the census from the age of 20 and up. And this excludes the tribe of Levi, whose count is from the age of 30 and up. Remember, Levi, Moses' tribe, those who would serve God and not get land later, they had a separate census. And in their census, it wasn't adult males 20 and up. It was 30 and up. So they're part of a different census. So it seems like they were not part of that decree that they would die in the wilderness. And we've seen that the tribe of Levi was more loyal. They didn't participate in the sin of the golden calf either. And it's not a stretch to believe that they didn't panic and say, we're going to be defeated in the desert. Why would they say that? They're close to Moses and they get it, that God is going to lead them into the promised land. So the Gemara asks, and is it true that no one from any of the other tribes besides Levi entered Eretz Yisrael? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa, Yair, the son of Menashe, and Machir, the son of Menashe, were born in the days of Jacob, and they did not die until the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael, as it is stated, and the men of Ai, killed of them about 36 men. That's in Joshua 7:5. And concerning this verse, it is taught, literally 36 people were killed. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Nehemiah said to him, but is it stated that 36 were killed? Isn't it stated nothing other than about 36, around 36, approximately 36. The Torah is very specific. Tanakh is very specific. It didn't say 36. It said around 36. So rather, this unusual term is referring to Yair ben Menashe, who was equivalent to the majority of the Sanhedrin, whose maximum number of judges is 71, of which 36 is a slight majority. Evidently then, Yair, the son of Menashe, also survived the time in the wilderness. So rather, Rav Acha bar Yaakov said the decree of death was not decreed upon those less than 20 years old or upon those more than 60 years old at the time of the sin of the spies. You just kind of take it for granted that people who were over 60 were not going to be alive 38 years later to enter the promised land. But as we've seen here and there's some very long-lived people. And so those guys were not subject to dying in the wilderness. And if they could survive that long, they enter the promised land. And the Gemara explains, not upon those less than 20 years old, as it is written, from 20 years old and upward. And not upon those more than 60 years old, because he learns that there is a verbal analogy between and upward in the verse cited, and the phrase and upward from the laws of valuations. When somebody wants to consecrate money to the temple according to his own value, his erech value, called a valuation, which is dependent on your gender and age. So from 60 years old and upward is the way one of the valuations is stated in Leviticus 27:7. So just as they are concerning valuations, more than 60 years old is comparable to less than 20 years old, as there is a distinct category of those between the ages of 20 and 60. So too here, more than 60 years old is comparable to less than 20 years old, insofar as those older were not subject to the decree of dying in the wilderness. Yair, the son of Menashe, Yair ben Menashe, who was already older, did not die in the wilderness. New subject. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Was Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, divided according to the tribes, meaning that each of the 12 tribes received an equal portion, and the members of each tribe divided these tribal portions according to their numbers? So therefore, if every tribe got an equal amount of land, and one tribe had a larger population than another tribe, then the individuals of that tribe would get smaller family portions than a tribe that had fewer people to divide up the land mass, right? If every tribe got an equal land mass, then tribes with greater populations, each of them would get less land. Or did they divide up Israel such that every individual got about the same amount of land, and a tribe with a larger number of people ended up getting a larger land mass of Israel? That's what we're examining. So a dilemma was raised. Was Eretz Yisrael divided according to the tribes? Or perhaps Eretz Yisrael was divided according to men's skulls, meaning like a head count, as I just explained. So now on page 122a. And the Gemara suggests, come in here a proof. The verse states, according to the lot, like a lottery, shall their inheritance be divided between the more and the fewer. Numbers 26:56. So evidently, whether the tribe had many or few people, the tribe as a whole received a portion equal to that of every other tribe. And each individual within the tribe received a different amount of land than those in other tribes. So it's the first choice that I gave you. Each tribe received about the same amount of land, and a tribe with a larger population, those families got smaller pieces. And another proof can be seen from that which is taught in a Baraisa. Eretz Yisrael is destined to be divided among 13 tribes during the Messianic era, right? When Mashiach comes, and the whole Messianic age begins, and the Jews are all returned to Israel, and there's resurrection of the dead. So all the Jews that ever lived and who have a portion in the resurrection of the dead, that definition of olam haba, the world to come. So they will all come to Israel, and Israel will expand to, have all the Jews who've ever lived be comfortable in the land. And it would be divided among the tribes. Presumably now everyone will know what tribe they belong to, even though most people don't know unless they're Levites or Kohanim, which are a subset of the Levites. All the other Jews don't know what tribe they are descended from. But presumably when we're divided by tribes in the Messianic age, we will know what tribe everyone belongs to. Okay, but what's interesting is in the Messianic age, it's going to be divided among 13 tribes. What do you mean 13 tribes? Why was the initial division among 12? 12 because Joseph's sons, Menashe and Ephraim, each got their own portion. So it should have been 13, but the Levites didn't get land. They got cities and they served God and received tithes, etc., but they didn't get a region of Israel. So it was divided among 12 tribes. Sounds like it's going to be different in the Messianic age. Yes? What? Not exactly. Let's see. Eretz Yisrael is destined to be divided among 13 tribes during the Messianic era, unlike the division in the time of Yehoshua, Joshua. As initially the land was divided only among 12 tribes, when Joshua led the children of Israel into the land, as the Torah does not allot a portion to the tribe of Levi. So the Brisa continues, and the land was divided only with money, such that each tribe that received a portion more valuable than average compensated another tribe that had received a portion less valuable than average, as it is stated, between the more and the fewer. So Rabbi Yehuda said, the area of land whose yield is a sah of grain in Judea is so valuable that it is equal in value to the area necessary to produce 5 sah of grain in the Galilee. Meaning, land that is closer to Jerusalem, especially in the ancient past, when the only way to get to Jerusalem was to walk there. Maybe you could ride your donkey, but you weren't driving a car. Right? It's like a 1 or 2 hour drive, maybe a 3 hour drive from the north. Big deal, 3 hour drive. But if you're walking, that's a 1 week walk rather than a 1 day walk. So being close to Jerusalem is incredibly valuable. And land, the same amount of land, is going to be worth much more if it's closer to Jerusalem than if it was far away from Jerusalem, since all the tribes were obligated to gather in Jerusalem for the festivals. So if a tribe got a portion in Israel far away from Jerusalem, and it was the same amount of land as a tribe that was close to Jerusalem, same amount of land, not fair. So what did they do? There was some kind of a compensation. So how did they compensate the tribes who were far away? And the land was divided only with money, such that each tribe that received a portion more valuable than average compensated another tribe that had received a portion less valuable than average, as it is stated, between the more and the fewer, as I just said. Now the Brisa continues, and the land... Now, so what does that mean? By money? Okay, so the tribes that were far away, they got money from the tribes that were close. Is that fair? No matter how much money you give the faraway tribes, who's getting it? Is it really going to create generational wealth? What if it's squandered? Then, 3, 4, 10 generations from when the division was made, the people, who are far away, that money that they got, that's long gone. And their land is much further away from Jerusalem than the portions that are close to Jerusalem. Is it really fair? Let's keep reading. The Brisa continues, and the land, when it was divided only by a lottery. As it is stated, only by lot shall the land be divided. How did they do it? And the land was divided only with the Urim V'Tumim. So a kind of prophetic breastplate of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, which they could use to ask questions of God, usually pertaining to war. But for the division of land after the wars of conquest, when they got around to dividing up the land, they consulted the Urim V'Tumim, as it is stated by the pronouncement of the lot, Numbers 26:56. So the Brisa asks, how can these texts be reconciled? One indicates that the land was divided by lottery, and the other indicates that the land was divided with the Urim V'Tumim. So was it that they just, pick lots out of a hat? Or was it that they inquired of the Urim V'Tumim which tribe should get which part of Israel. And the Bryce explains, Elazar the high priest was dressed with the Urim V'Tumim, and Joshua and all the Jewish people were standing before him, and a lottery receptacle containing the names of the tribes, and another lottery receptacle containing the names of the boundaries of the 12 different regions of the land of Israel were placed before him. And Elazar would ascertain the assignments of land with the divine spirit and say, in accordance with the notification of the Urim V'Tumim, for example, the name of the tribe Zebulun now emerges from the receptacle in the lottery, and the region whose boundary is Akko emerges with it from the other receptacle. Right? So he would say, the Urim V'Tumim has declared that the next lot you're going to pick is Zebulun, and the next piece of land you're going to pick is the one near Akko. And then they would draw lots, right? And that the prophecy was immediately proven because after the high priest stated this, they would mix the lots in the receptacle of the tribes, and the lot of Zebulun would indeed emerge in his hand. And they would mix the lots of the land masses in the receptacle of the boundaries, and indeed the piece with the boundary of Akko would emerge in his hand. So people knew that it wasn't just luck, that the luck was backed up by prophecy. He would predict. Imagine, I mean, you might think that the fix is in, right? But imagine if that before they, made the ping pong balls rise and the lotto and the mega bucks, mega millions, whatever it's called, somebody said, I prophesied that these are going to be the numbers. And then those numbers came up. But this really was prophecy, and that is what happened. And Elazar would repeat the process and ascertain the assignments with the divine spirit and say the name of the tribe Naphtali now emerges, and the region whose boundary is in Ginnasar emerges with it from the other receptacle. And after stating this, he would mix the lots of the receptacle of the tribes, and the lot of Naphtali would emerge in his hand. He would mix the lots in the receptacle of the boundaries, and the boundary of Ginnasar would emerge in his hand, and so he would proceed with each and every tribe. And the Brisa continues, and unlike the division in this world, i.e. in the time of Joshua, will be the division of portions in the world to come. Now back to the Messianic age, when it says there's going to be 13 divisions. So what is that? So that division was 12 tribes, got 12 pieces of land at the time of Joshua. And it's going to be different at the time of olam haba, at the time of the Messianic age. In this world, now, if a person has a field of grain, right, in our regular world, if a person has a field of grain, okay, so he does not have a field for an orchard. If he has a field for an orchard, he does not have a field of grain, right? Either you have an orchard or you have a grain field. Those things don't occur on the same piece of land. And this is so because each climate and variety of soil is suitable for a different kind of produce. But in the world to come, in olam haba, you do not have any person who does not have a portion of Eretz Yisrael in the mountain and in the lowland and in the valley. As it is stated, the gate of Reuben, 1, the gate of Judah, Yehuda, or Judea, 1, the gate of Levi, 1. That's Ezekiel 48:31, which is to say that everyone's portion will be the same. Miraculously, every Jew will get a portion of equal value in size and type, and his piece of land will have a mountainous part and a valley part and probably a beautiful flowing stream and beautiful trees and orchard and grain, everything. Of course, it's miraculous. Blessed, and the Holy One, blessed be He, will distribute it to them personally. As it is stated, and these are their portions, says the Lord. Ezekiel 48:29. That concludes the Baraisa. Now, the Gemara states its proof, why we've been talking about all of this. In any event, that Baraisa taught, as initially the land was divided only among the 12 tribes, conclude from the Baraisa that the land was divided according to the tribes and not apportioned directly to each person. And the Gemara affirms, conclude from the Baraisa that this is the case, right? So they divide the way that Elazar with the prophecy held it up, and he said, okay, this tribe gets that piece of land, this tribe gets that piece of land, and each land was about the same size. So a tribe with a larger population, the people in that piece of land would get smaller fields, right? Smaller family inheritances. Okay. Now the Gemara analyzes this Baraisa that we just cited. Now the master says above, Eretz Yisrael is destined to be divided among 13 tribes in olam haba, in the world to come, the Messianic age. The Gemara asks, as to the other, that 13th portion, for whom is it? Are you saying that the tribe of Levi is going to get a portion of land, but they get cities, they get something else? So who's it for? Rav Chisda said, for the king. As it is written, and they that serve the city out of all the tribes of Israel shall till it, like work the land. Ezekiel 48:19. And the verse is understood as meaning that the nation will collectively allot a portion to the king who serves the needs of the nation. Are we talking about a regular human king? We're talking about olam haba. We're talking about the world to come. We're talking about Mashiach ben David, the king Messiah. Rav Papa said to Abaye, why is the verse interpreted this way? Why not say that the verse speaks of mere wages, so that the king has rights to collect taxes, but not an actual portion of land? And the Gemara answers, that possibility should not enter your mind, as it is written, and the residue shall be for the prince. Mashiach will be known as a prince, on the one side and on the other of the sacred offering and of the possession of the city. Based on this latter verse, and that was Ezekiel 48:21, based on this latter verse, the former verse speaks of a specific tract of land. Some part of Israel is going to be given as the royal property of Mashiach ben David. The Bryce also states, and the land was divided only with money, now back in the time of Joshua. The land was divided only with money, as it is stated between the more and the fewer. With regard to what is this said? If we say this with regard to beauty and ugliness, i.e., that those who receive inferior quality land received monetary compensation from the others, is that to say we are dealing with fools who would agree to take inferior quality land in exchange for more money? Right, what I said before, if the land closer to Jerusalem is worth so much more, is that tribe just going to give money to that tribe that's, way up in the north? And like I said, that money could be squandered. It could be lost. It's not generational the way that land is. So are we talking about fools who would accept money in exchange for land over the generations? Of course not. Rather, it is said with regard to the difference between land that is close to Jerusalem and land that is far from Jerusalem. Those whose property was close to Jerusalem compensated those whose property was farther away. Not just quality of soil, but proximity to Jerusalem. We still haven't talked about what kind of compensation. The Gemara notes there was a dispute between Tanaim with regard to the manner by which his compensation was given. Rabbi Eliezer says the tribes compensated each other with money. Which, what are we talking about, fools? Rabbi Yehoshua says the tribes compensated each other with land by giving extra land to those whose portions were in less advantageous locations. That makes more sense. You're farther away from Jerusalem, or you're in a place where farming is difficult, so you get more land. Okay, that's more equitable. The Baraisa also states, and the land was divided only by a lottery, as it was stated, only by lot shall the land be divided, Numbers 26:55. The sages taught in the phrase only by lot. The term only indicates that Joshua and Caleb, Yehoshua and Caleb, are excluded from this proviso. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what were they excluded? If we say that they did not take portions at all, now that it has already been taught that they took the portions of the spies in addition to their own, we learned that on page 118b, is it necessary to teach that they also got their own portions? Obviously, if they got additional portions, they must have had their own portions. It goes without saying that they did collect their own portions. So rather, the exclusion teaches that they did not take portions by a lottery, but rather according to explicit designation by God. With regard to Yehoshua, this is as it is written, according to the commandment of the Lord, they gave him the city that he asked, even Timnath Serah in the hill country of Ephraim. We learned that in Joshua 19:50. I'm very close to done. If you have questions or comments, please get them in now. Page 122b, the Gemara interjects, it is written concerning Joshua's burial, and they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath Serah, Joshua 24:30, and it is written, and they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath Heres. So was it Timnath Serah or Timnath Heres? It's made of the same letters, but reversed. That's in Judges 2:9. So it's the name where he's buried is a little bit different in Judges 2:9 versus Joshua 24:30. Why is the name changed? Rabbi Lazar says initially its fruits were as dry as clay, kacheres, and ultimately its fruits were so plump that they were spoiling, masrichin. And there are those who say the opposite. Initially the fruits were spoiling prematurely, and ultimately they lasted as long as clay without spoiling. In other words, after Joshua's region of Israel was settled, it became more fertile, more productive, more beautiful. And finally, Caleb also received his portion directly from God and not through the lottery, as it is written, and they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had spoken, and he drove out from there the 3 sons of the giant. Judges 1:20. Judges 1, verse 20. The Gemara asks about this verse, but Hebron, the city of Hebron today, Hebron, was a city of refuge. Hebron was a near Miklat, where the manslaughterer could flee and be safe from the avenger of blood. In the passage about the city of refuge in the Torah, Hebron was a city of refuge that belonged to the priests, as described in the book of Joshua 21:13. How could it have been given to Caleb? And Abaye said, its outskirts, i.e. only the fields and vineyards lying beyond the city limits were given to Caleb, not the whole city, as it is written, but the fields of the city and the villages thereof they gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for his possession. Joshua 21:12. That's what I've got for us tonight. Just seeing 2 questions. Sharon, and Sarah bas Asher. That's right, the daughter of Asher, Sarah, was alive when they went from Israel and also when they left Egypt, and appears much later in the Tanakh and is considered among some rabbis as one of the people who never died. Exactly. And she was a great comfort to Jacob, as I recall. There's all kinds of mystical stories about her. Wonderful story. So that's another one who went into Egypt, came out of Egypt, apparently entered the wilderness, and probably also entered the promised land. She was really long-lived. Thank you, Sharon. And finally, Lucy, which tribe would converts belong to in the Messianic age and their descendants? Wonderful question, right? So a convert, when they convert and they do the whole study and classes, etc., and commit to join the Jewish people, and you have to commit to be a Jew, bound by all the mitzvahs. Right? This is the problem with a conversion in which a person doesn't commit to be, especially Shomer Shabbos, kosher, etc., to be obligated in all the mitzvahs. So once a ger, right? The ger tzedek, the person, the righteous Gentile who wants to join the Jewish people and be adopted by the Jewish family, as it were, and commits to be a Torah Jew, obligated in every way. They take on a Hebrew name, and it's, let's say they take on the Hebrew name Joshua, just for example, Yehoshua, and it would be Yehoshua ben Avraham Vesara, right? So it's always the name of the parents in Hebrew, the name of the mother for healing, the name of the father, when we're taking a roll call or being called to Torah, etc. So when a person who doesn't have Jewish parents becomes a Jew, he is understood to be the son of Abraham or the daughter of Abraham and Sarah. The son of Abraham and Sarah, or the daughter of Abraham and Sarah. Which tribe would they get a possession in at the time that Mashiach comes and the converts go along with everyone else to Israel? I don't know what the answer is, but there's also this idea that a person who's so drawn to the Jewish people that they're going to make themselves obligated in 613 commandments rather than just the 7 Noahide commandments, which is a big commitment. And I mean, look at how much the Jewish people suffer. Look how much anti-Semitism there is in the world. Look how many persecutions there have been over history. So somebody who's that drawn to become a member of the Jewish people, it's because they already are Jewish, right? That somehow it was like some kind of there was some kind of a fork in the road, and some ancestor, just kind of left the Jewish people, was lost to the Jewish people, a kidnapped baby, who knows what. But somehow that person is actually a Jewish soul who finds their way back to the Jewish people. And if that's true, then they already have a tribe. And those are the tribes, like every other Jew who doesn't know what tribe they're a member of, then presumably the Geirim, those converts, would find out at that time. If I'm wrong about that, then maybe they're just assigned the tribe by God, like the way that Joshua and Caleb were assigned their holdings by God. That's as much as I know. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Wonderful to get this year off started with some beautiful Torah learning as we leave the holiday season and enter the new elevated plateau of our lives to come in this year. All the best. Good Vach. Shavua Tov.